Yeah. I used to love the pantos. We did them all. Had the stage rigged out with trapdoors, every trick in the book. And a few that weren't in the book. I still keep all the old sets down here under the stage. Here, have a look at this.
Oh. Why, it looks like Bluebeard's castle.
So it is. Ah. Yeah. Of course, the mice have got out a bit now. But look at that. Lovely bit of work. Ah, the laughter of children, Father Brown. The laughter of the kiddies. Nothing like it.
Oh, yes.
No. Oh, we had them all here, we did, in the old days. Little Titch.
Oh.
Yes. Mr. Ralph, he always had to be called. George Eastwood, Vesta Tilly. Yeah. We even had poor old Dan Lido himself. Well,
did you really?
We did indeed. It was in a panto I first met Mrs. Mandeville, 8 years ago. I brought her in as principal boy. Of course, we don't do that sort of thing now. The wife has raised the tone a bit.
Yes, you're putting on School for Scandal.
Yes. Well, the wife likes these, what she calls, classical comedies. Now, just between you and me, I reckon they're a sight more classic than comic. Still, not that we didn't have the classics here before, you know. We had Henry Irving one time. Sir Henry Irving in the Bells, it was.
Really?
Oh,
yes.
Yes. Right, here we are. This is my little den. If you listen, you can hear them all acting away on the stage above us. Eh?
Oh.
Yeah, someone's singing.
Yes. Ah. Oh.
That's it, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, Miss Moroni.
Yes, now, her dressing room's bang opposite, down that little corridor, see?
Oh, yes. Who's the woman outside?
Oh, that's Mrs. Sands, my wife's dresser. Bit of an old tartar, but loyal as you like.
And the gentleman?
But he's our leading man, Norman Knight. Bit of, star, isn't that what they call them nowadays? Yeah. Anything up, Mrs. Sands?
I beg your pardon, sir.
Any sound from the prima donna?
I haven't heard anything. Not for some time, sir.
And you, Norman. Oh, by the way, this is Father Brown. I'm sure you recognise Norman Knight, Father Brown.
Oh, I...
Charmed.
Anyway, you heard anything from La Moroni, old chap?
Earlier on there were a few what sounded like curses, but then the rest, shall we say, was silence.
Oh, bloomin' heck. Do you think she could have done herself in, Father Brown?
Well, if she'd been a German, gone away to think quietly about metaphysics and Weltschmerz,
Sorry?
I should have been... Yes, Weltschmerz. I should have been all for breaking the door down. Well, these Italians don't really die so easily, and are not liable to kill themselves in a rage. Somebody else, perhaps. Yes, possibly. It might be as well to take ordinary precautions if she comes out with a leap.
Oh, blimey, that's just what we need. Hello? Who's there?
It's me, Governor. There's someone here wants to see you.
Well, tell him I'm busy, will you?
Monday.
Oh, God. Hello, Lady Miriam. How kind of you to call. Allow me, Lady Miriam Talbot.
What
this
a
is...
divine costume. Don't tell me you're playing Canon Chasuble. Or is that some other play, Monday? Poor dear Oscar. My mother knew him, you know, when he was all the rage before...
No, Father Brown's not an actor. He's
now,
a real...
it's... Wait a minute. Don't tell me. It's Norman Wright, isn't it? Norman Wright?
Knight, Lady Miriam, Knight, not right.
What's not right?
No, he's not... He's a knight, my lady.
Oh, what a gaffe. A knight. I'm so sorry, Sir Norman. Now, you do forgive me, don't you, Sir Norman?
Yes, Lady Mirabelle.
Monday. I can't come tonight, and I don't want to.
Yes, well,
I
don't mind.
like writers, and I especially like actors, Sir Norman? But I don't like plays. They're a bore.
Yes,
As
well,
I say, I can't come tonight, and I don't want to. But I've never seen a rehearsal in ordinary clothes.
Yeah.
Might be a bit funny, you know. You simply must let me see a rehearsal. That'd be different.
Lady
All
Miriam.
those funny people in the wrong clothes. Somehow nowadays, Sir Norman, one can never find a thing one's never seen.
Will I not act?
I'm sorry, gents, if you'd excuse me just a minute or two. Of course, Lady Miriam, I can give you a box for the rehearsal if you wish it.
Topping, Monday. Thanks awfully.
Not at all. Perhaps your ladyship would come this way. See what we can do.
I wonder whether Mandeville can be so much of a cad he actually prefers that sort of woman.
Prefers her to... yes. Perhaps we'd better relieve Mrs. Sands, Mr. Knight.
Yes. It's all right, Mrs. Sands. You can have a rest now.
Oh, very generous of you, I'm sure. Pity no one thought of letting me off earlier, and I might have got a bite to eat. Goodbye, then, gentlemen.
Our Mrs. Sands is rather a rough diamond.
Has she been with Mrs. Mandeville long?
Oh, yes. She was with her touring the classics before she met Mandeville. I think Mrs. Sands thinks this place is rather a come-down for her mistress, as between ourselves it is.
Oh?
I certainly wouldn't dream of playing here if it wasn't for the opportunity of acting with someone of Mrs. Mandeville's talent, and, I may say, character. What she's doing married to the sort of man who brings in little Italian...
Yes, yes. Speaking of little Italians, I feel I really ought to perhaps try to make some sort of contact with Miss Moroni.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Scusi, signora. Scusi, signora Moroni. Sono un amico di signora Mandeville.
Porca puttana! Vattene all'inferno e lasciami in pace! Non capisco perché la gente non si rende conto che io...
Yes. What's she saying? I think I'd rather not translate it, but at least we know she's alive. Oh, and kicking, it seems. Kicking? Well, she seems to be breaking glass with her feet. A looking glass, perhaps. Oh, dear. Mr. Mandeville.
Hello, Father Brown. Sorry about that. What news from in there?
Well, we've established she's still alive. She hasn't committed suicide.
Oh, well, that's a relief, as old Baden-Powell said on Mafeking night, eh? Yeah. Well, do you think I should get Sam, the stage carpenter, to get the door off its hinges?
No, not if you want her to act in the play.
No?
If you force the door, she'll raise the roof and refuse to stay in the place. If, however, you leave her alone, she'll probably come out from mere curiosity.
You're a clever man, Father Brown.
But of course he is, dearest. Come along, Jarvis.
Yes, Mrs. Mandeville.
Dear Father Brown, I'm sorry we had to abandon you. Mr. Jarvis and I had to finish that scene. We couldn't go any farther without Maria, of course. Have you had any success with our little Italian termagant?
Yes, Father. Did you manage to communicate with her? Yes, Mr. Jarvis. We did exchange a few words.
Father Brown thinks we should leave her alone for a bit more, let her stew a bit.
In that case, I'll get Mrs. Sands to keep watch again, and we'll get on with rehearsing the scenes in which she doesn't appear. It was a pleasure to meet you, Father Brown.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Well, I'll get back to the office then. Thanks for the trouble, Father Brown. I'm sorry to have dragged you out here.
I must insist that at least you let us give you lunch.
Yes, most kind.
There's a capital chop house right next door. They know me there. You tell them to charge it to me.
Oh, no, I couldn't.
Oh, it's the least we could do, Father Brown.
Oh.
Mr. Jarvis, we'll be rehearsing the fourth act. I'll get someone to read in for you. Would you take Father Brown to lunch as our guest?
It'd be a pleasure, Mrs. Mandeville.
Oh, that's settled then. Now, everybody, the fourth act, not a dress rehearsal.
Very well then, dear lady, not a dress rehearsal. Good. I could wish the costumes of this infernal period weren't quite so elaborate.
Oh, I'll see you later then, Father Brown. Enjoy your meal. I must get stuck into some paperwork. Cheerio, all.
Anything else, gentlemen? We've some very tasty stilts.
Oh, no, thank you. I couldn't eat anything else. Yes, Mr. Mandeville was right. This is an excellent place, and really it is most generous of him to pay for the meal.
He's a strange one, Mandeville. Used to be as jovial a philanderer as ever sauntered down Piccadilly. Mm-hmm. But now, there's some sort of shadow in his life. Maybe something on his conscience. And I doubt whether it has anything to do with his fashionable flirtations. Well, look at the way he treats his poor neglected wife.
Neglected?
Oh, yes. It's pathetic the way she sometimes admits she wished she had a more intellectual life. Yet, she always does her duty. But I'm afraid I must be getting back. Waiter!
Yes, Mr. Jarvis.
This is to go on Mr. Mandeville's bill.
Yes, sir.
Waiter, you know Mr. Mandeville well?
Oh, yes, sir. Though he doesn't come in as often as he used to before he was married. But then we don't go to the theatre nowadays. Not since he's stopped doing pantos.
Yes.
Wonderful they were, them pantos. They had Dan Leno as the dame once, Father.
Oh, yes, yes.
My wife was in that. She was the princess.
Was she, sir?
Yes.
I'm afraid I can't recall her, sir.
Oh.
We only had eyes for the old dame. How marvellous she was. He was.
Of course. That's it. That's what's the matter with our Italian friend. Is Miss Moroni a good actress, Mr. Jarvis?
Oh, yes, I'd say she is rather. She has quite a reputation, in fact.
Yes, we must get back. Did I have my umbrella, waiter?
I'll just get it, sir.
Thank you so much. You know, there is generally a perfectly good reason for mad Italian rages. The Latins are far more logical than we are.
Hello!
It was an excellent...
Hello!
Thank you. What?
I think this gentleman wishes to see you, sir.
Why, Inspector Bagshaw, what are you doing here?
I could say the same of you, Father Brown. You seem to get everywhere.
Well, we do consider ourselves the Catholic Church, Inspector.
I'm sorry, I don't quite follow. Anyway, look, I'll tell you why I'm here. That theatre you were at this morning. There's been a murder.
Not Miss Maroney.
No, not Miss Maroney, Mr. I don't believe I've had the pleasure.
This is Mr. Jarvis. He's one of my parishioners. He's also an actor.
Delighted to meet you, Inspector.
Mr. Jarvis, the actor. Well, Mr. Jarvis, can I ask you, where were you between the hours of 12:30 and 1:30 today?
He was having lunch with me.
Was he? Oh, well, one more to cross off the list of suspects. No offence meant, Mr. Jarvis, but you were my last hope. No.
Inspector,
and
will you
I can
please let
tell
us
you,
in-
it's not Miss Maroney who's dead, though she has gone missing.
What?
When Mr. Knight found the body, they decided to break her door down. Well, it's understandable. Anyway, they found she'd gone, smashed a window and climbed out.
Good Lord.
Then who is dead, Inspector?
It's Mr. Mandeville, sir.
Mr. Mandeville?
Stabbed in his office when the door was locked, and everyone apart from you, sir, was on stage, as witnessed per Lady Miriam Talbot, who was watching them. Never come across anything like it. And that old cow in the corridor...
Mrs. Sachs?
Oh, yes, that's right, that one. She swears blind no one went near his office. Anyway, I'd be glad if you gentlemen come back to the theatre with me.
Yes.
I'd rather take your statements there. I left a young constable in charge, and you can't trust him these days.
But I've already told you all this before, Inspector.
If we could just go through it again, Mr. Knight, in case we missed anything.
Very well. As I said, we were all on the stage when this dreadful thing happened, beneath our feet, as it were. We just finished rehearsing Act 4 with poor Mrs. Mandeville. There, dear lady. Well, all of us except Mr. Jarvis.
Yes, I've spoken to him. Please continue, sir.
We couldn't do much more without Miss Maroney, so Mrs. Mandeville knocked on her husband's door to ask him to do something.
And what happened then, Mrs. Mandeville?
I knocked several times, Inspector, but could get no reply. I was naturally concerned that my husband might have been ill. Mr. Knight gallantly volunteered to break the door down.
Which you then did, and found the corpse, and I quote, lying forward on his desk, stabbed in the neck with an old property dagger.
Inspector, have a care for the lady's feelings.
I'm very sorry, Mrs. Mandeville. I'm very sorry to distress you further. But is there any other entrance to Mr. Mandeville's office?
How do you mean, Father Brown?
Well, is there, for instance, another door?
Oh, no. It was just a sort of wooden box built under the stage when we stopped doing those awful pantomimes. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm afraid this has all been rather a shock. Would you excuse me?
Oh, of course, Mrs. Mandeville.
Oh,
Mrs. Mandeville.
oh, Mr. Knight. Thank you. I'm afraid I came over a little faint. Mr. Knight, perhaps you would be kind enough to...
But of course, dear lady. If this inspector will allow me to leave...
Yes, go on.
Now, that is very strange, Inspector.
Oh, Lady Miriam. Now, what's that? What's strange?
I'm sure Mundy told me his name was Wright, not Knight. I say, do you think that's significant?
I doubt it, Lady Miriam. What I
When
should like
exactly did you leave your box, Lady Miriam?
Oh, the very moment they finished that thing they were doing. I mean, it was all jolly interesting, but I was getting a teeny bit bored. So I popped down to say thank you and bye-bye to poor Mundy.
Yes, if I were you, Lady Miriam, I'd go and have a rest. It's all been a nasty shock. If Inspector Bagshaw has finished.
Oh, yes. You go and have a lie down, my lady.
Thank you.
Not at all.
Thank you. Poor old Mundy. Poor old thing.
What about me? Can I go too?
Ah, dear Mrs. Sands, just one thing.
What?
You are quite sure that no one went into Mr. Mandeville's office?
Like I said, I was outside all the time. Nobody came. I didn't fall asleep.
Yes,
and
but
before you ask me again, that Italian thing didn't come out neither. And I didn't hear no scream from him. Satisfied?
Thank you.
Now can I go?
Don't leave the building.
Ta very much, I must say.
My opinion is that Mrs. Sands is a grumpy, gloomy sort of card.
You think she's lying? Is that what you mean?
No, I think I meant it more or less as a detached study of character.
Well, if it's not her, it's got to be the Moroni woman, though, how she did it. What a conundrum.
Oh, dear. I've just realised. I rather fear I myself was a witness to Miss Moroni not being the murderer.
What?
Yes, it's very foolish of me. Oh, I should have realised. You see, an hour or so before the murder, I heard her smashing something. I stupidly thought she was breaking a mirror. But I'm sure an actress would be much too superstitious to smash a mirror.
Of course.
Yes, she must have been making her escape by breaking the window well before the murder.
So it has to be Mrs. Sands. Then God knows why she'd do it.
Oh, I'm sure God would know if she had done it.
But Father Brown, you said she was an unpleasant character.
Oh, I certainly said that Mrs. Sands' sulky look was a study in character, but not in the character of Mrs. Sands herself. If you want to know what a lady is like, don't look at her, for she may be too clever for you. Don't look at the men around her, for they may be too silly about her. But look at some other woman who is always near her, and especially one who is under her. You will see in that mirror her real face. And the face mirrored in Mrs. Sands was very ugly. The true face of her mistress was mirrored there.
Surely you don't mean Mrs. Mandeville?
Everybody regards her as a person of the most exalted ideals, almost moving on a higher plane than the rest of us.
I suspect that, like her servant, she is perhaps, as the inspector would say, something of a cow.
Oh, come on. I'm sure Mrs. Mandeville's behaviour towards the Italian girl was beautiful.
Oh, on the contrary. It struck me from the very first that she was being unfair to that poor Italian. And it was brought home to me in the chop house. Do you remember? The waiter had forgotten your wife as the beautiful princess, but only remembered Dan Leno as the old dame.
Wait a minute. What's Dan Leno got to do with it?
Well, Dan Leno had the star part. Isn't that the word? The matronly dame? And besides him, the beautiful princess was comparatively unimportant. Now, in The School for Scandal, the star part is also the matron, Lady Teazle, the part Mrs. Mandeville so charitably gave herself, while the part of the beautiful young heroine, as she called it, must be Maria, which is hardly a part at all.
Yes, that's true.
Yes, if the Italian was, as you say, a first-rate actress who had been promised a star part, she really had some excuse for her Italian rage.
Father Brown, I can't accept your view of Mrs. Mandeville. In all the time I've worked with her, she never complained.
Oh, what you mean is Mrs. Mandeville told you she never complained. As she told Norman Knight, she never complained, and probably every other man in the company. But in private, oh, yes, she complained. And yet, really, what did she have to complain about? Nobody pretended that her husband drank or beat her or left her without money. And though he may have been something of a philanderer before he met her, I suspect he was so much in awe of her as to have been completely faithful as a husband. Yes, when one looks at the facts, apart from the atmospheric impression of martyrdom she contrived to spread, the facts were really quite the other way. Mandeville left off making money on pantomimes to please her. He started losing money on classical drama to please her. She wanted to play Lady Teazle in The School for Scandal, and she got to do so. And no doubt she arranged the scenery and furniture as she wanted.
Yes, yeah, but what's that got to do with it?
Oh, you've lost me again. What are you getting at, Father Brown?
Can we go down to Mr. Mandeville's office, Inspector?
Well, if you want to. You want to view the corpse?
No. I want to view the ceiling. Ah, yes, look up there. I thought so. You see, Mr. Jarvis?
Yes, I do see. Good heavens.
Well, I don't.
This used to be a pantomime theatre, Inspector. This office is built under the stage. It's full of all sorts of tricks and devices. Immediately above us is one of the trapdoors. That was how the murderer got in, down from the stage.
But everyone was on stage. You think someone popped out in full view of everyone else?
No, the plan could only work in the fourth act of School for Scandal.
Of course, the famous fourth act.
Look, I only went to a board school. Will somebody please explain?
In the fourth act of the play, Lady Teazle spends a very long time hidden behind a screen when her husband arrives at an embarrassing moment. She's technically on stage,
But if Mrs. Mandeville had fixed for the screen to be around this here trapdoor, she could nip down, catch her old man unawares, pretend she had something to say to him, and...
Yes, and that was Mrs. Mandeville's alibi.
I think I'd better go and have a word with Mrs. Mandeville.
What about motive, Father?
Oh, I suspect we need look no further than Mr. Knight.
You think she's in love with him?
I do hope so, for really it would be the most human excuse. But I have my doubts. She wanted to get rid of her husband, an old-fashioned, vulgar, suburban hack, not even making much money. Yes, she wanted a career as a brilliant classical actress, married to a rapidly rising actor. She was always dogging her husband in private, hoping to use one of his former liaisons as an excuse for a divorce. He died because he wished to remain faithful to her, and she could not bring herself simply to run away with her lover. Her ladylike values demanded respectability, and she was prepared to kill for it.
In The Actor and the Alibi by G.K. Chesterton, the part of Father Brown was played by Andrew Sachs, Munden Mandeville by Peter Jeffrey, Mrs. Mandeville by Sheila Grant, Inspector Bagshaw by Bill Wallace, Ashton Jarvis by David Brierley, Norman Knight by Charles Bailey, and Lady Miriam Talbot by Fleur Chandler, the house manager and the waiter by Jonathan Scott, Mrs. Sands by Pauline Letts, and Miss Maroney by Karen Asco. The Actor and the Alibi was adapted by John Scotney, and the director from Bristol was Alec Reed.
We present The Absence of Mr. Glass, adapted for radio by John Scotney, with Andrew Sachs as Father Brown, Olivier Pierre as Flambeau, and Bernard Archard as Dr. Orion Hood.
Always when I got the kettle on.
Excuse me.
Yes, what do you want?
My name is Brown, Father Brown. I believe a friend of mine, a Monsieur Flambeau, is a guest here.
Monsieur Flambeau, oh, come in.
Oh, thank you.
Wait here.
Oh, thank you so much.
Monsieur Flambeau, there's a clerical gentleman here, says he knows you.
Father Brown?
Yes.
Ah, my dear Father Brown.
Flambeau.
What a pleasure to see you. You had my message.
Oh, indeed, yes.
As soon as I learned you were visiting the resort, I told Mr. The gentleman who lives here, and he, my host, is most anxious to make your acquaintance. Please, would you tell the master Father Brown is here?
Very good, sir.
Flambeau, what is this? Why all this secrecy? The gentleman who lives here, the master, my host. Who is it you're staying with?
Let us simply say a very eminent consulting detective, now living in retirement on the south coast and devoting himself to beekeeping.
Good heavens! You don't mean
Indeed. My host does not like his real name to be used.
Oh, but surely he has nothing to be ashamed of.
No, but since his retirement from his all too well-known address in Baker Street, he has no desire to be plagued by heads of state and baffled detectives every time a case of more than usual complexity comes up.
Yes.
So he chooses to call himself Dr. Hood.
Dr. Hood?
Dr. Orion Hood, my dear Father Brown.
Ah, Dr. Hood. Hello.
The name Hood may be assumed, but as it happens, the title of doctor is not. I hold the degrees of Doctor of Letters from several universities, though I am not, my regret, a Doctor of Medicine like my old colleague and chronicler.
Yes.
But I observe that it is blustery on the coast. So blustery, I perceive, that you abandoned your original intention of walking from the town by the seashore, and instead turned inland and came over the downs.
Sir, oh, mon Dieu, you deduced so much. Oh,
No.
My dear sir, excellent.
Elementary, my dear Flambeau.
Elementary.
Well, you know my methods. Father Brown's soutane is covered in specks of salt, which suggests that a strong wind has blown sea spray onto it.
Yeah.
But it is no longer wet, so it has had time to dry. Therefore, it must be some time since he left the seashore.
Of course.
You will, of course, have noticed that his boots have both sand and the chalky mud of the downs on them.
I'm so sorry, I must wipe them.
Come through to my study.
Oh.
My admirable housekeeper has prepared us tea and muffins.
Oh, how delightful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mrs. Bush, you may pour tea now. There will be 3 of us.
Yes, sir.
You are no doubt wondering why I have invited Monsieur Flambeau to stay with me, Father Brown.
Why, yes, as a matter of fact, Mr.
Hood, Father Brown. Well, during his singular criminal career, Monsieur Flambeau had a hand in several cases which I must say taxed my powers to the limits.
Oh, you are too kind.
No. And he's kindly agreed to be my guest for a few days and discuss them with me. But pray sit down, gentlemen.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Stop! Father Brown, no. I beg you, do not sit there.
Why, what is it? Oh, good heavens.
My violins.
Oh, so sorry.
I'm afraid my habits remain somewhat untidy. Do please sit down. And if you would care to fill your pipe, I have some excellent Balkan tobacco somewhere. Where did I put it? It's in a slipper, a Persian slipper.
It's stuck to the mantelpiece with a knife, sir.
Oh, yes, of course, thank you. Old habits die hard, gentlemen.
They do indeed, sir.
That will be all, thank you, Mrs. Bush.
Yes, sir. Very good, sir.
Now, Father Brown.
Yes.
You are visiting one of your former parishioners, a Mrs. McNabb, a widow who is in some distress about her daughter.
Yes. Goodness, how could you deduce that?
Oh, my methods are sometimes quite straightforward. When Mrs. McNabb saw Flambeau in town yesterday, she recognised him as a close friend of her old parish priest and a frequent visitor to your room.
And it was she who told me you were coming down to see her.
Mrs. McNabb lives in one of those straggly houses near the town's end. She has one daughter.
Maggie?
Yes.
Pray proceed.
Well, she lets lodgings, and at the moment has just the one lodger, this young man called Mr.
Todhunter.
Todhunter, and he wants to marry the young woman.
And what does she want?
Why, she wants to marry him. That's just the awful complication. You see, she won't let them get married. Mrs. McNabb won't.
And the fellow is an ingenious rascal, no doubt. I recall a similar case, once brought to me by an illustrious client.
Yes, I'm sure. But young James Todhunter is a very decent man, as far as I know.
He seems to have quite a pocketful of money, but nobody knows what his trade is.
Mrs. McNabb is quite sure it's something dreadful and probably connected with dynamite.
Ah, yes. In the case of the illustrious client, my own experience...
Yes. No. The dynamite must be of a shy and noiseless sort, for no one's heard it.
Yet it seems the poor fellow shuts himself up for several hours a day and works away at something behind a locked door.
Well, Mrs. McNabb is very distraught. She told me a strange tale of 2 voices heard talking in the room, though when she opened the door, Todhunter was alone.
Interesting.
But also he has a huge trunk in the corner of his room which he keeps locked all day. Mrs. McNabb even half suggested that this other man crawls out from it every night.
No doubt it is full of Transylvanian soil.
What? Sorry, I don't quite follow. Transylvania?
What is this disturbance?
Oh, thank heavens you're here. Calm yourself, young lady, calm yourself. I'm extremely sorry, Dr. Hood. I tried to stop her, but this young woman said she must see the famous detective, and...
I see. Well, it is a most irregular proceeding, but...
Excuse me interrupting, Your Honour, but I must see Father Brown at once. It's a matter of extreme urgency.
Father Brown? Oh, I see. Then you are Maggie McNabb, I presume?
How did you know that, sir?
Oh, it's obvious, my dear young lady. Father Brown arrived in the town only today in order to visit your family. He is unlikely to be acquainted with anyone else here, certainly not anyone who reposes such trust in him that in an emergency they travel 2 miles out here to seek his assistance rather than summon the immediate aid of the local police. Now, I beg you, tell us what has happened. And Flambeau,
yes?
Ask my man to get the dog cart ready. I dare venture we shall be needing it.
I have a 4-wheeler waiting outside, sir.
You are indeed a young lady of enterprise. Come, gentlemen, let us hear Miss McNabb's story in the cab.
Now then, Maggie, tell us what has happened.
Oh, Father Brown, I'm terribly afraid that James has been murdered.
What?
That man Glass has been with him again. I heard it all through the door.
Yes?
They were talking quite plain. James speaks low with a burr, and the other voice was high and quavery.
That man Glass, who is he? Mr. Glass?
In truth, I don't know, sir. I know nothing about him, except his name is Glass. They were quarrelling about money, I think, for I heard James say again and again, "Oh, damn it, Mr. Glass," and then 2, 3, Mr. Glass, damn it.
But what makes you think the young man has been murdered?
Well, after I heard their quarrelling, there was a silence.
Yes?
I tried to break the door down, but I couldn't.
So what did you do?
Then I ran round to the backyard and managed to climb onto the windowsill that looks into the room. It was all dim, but there were all sorts of things scattered about. And I swear I saw James lying huddled up in a corner, as if he were drugged or strangled.
Oh, this is serious. Whip up, cabby!
Allez, plus vite!
There seemed to be some playing cards littered about.
Is that so?
And some wine glasses.
Yes?
And that was strange, because James is almost teetotal. Oh, and one of them was broken.
Interesting.
At least one. And there was a gentleman's silk top hat.
Top hat?
And there was... Oh, my God!
What?
Yeah.
I've just realised what it was.
Yes?
A long knife or sword lying glinting on the ground.
Mon Dieu.
Oh, Father Brown, I hope James is all right.
There, my child.
Oh, Father Brown.
You say Mr. Todhunter is not given to strong drink. Is he in any other way profligate with his money? Is he a gambler?
Oh, no, sir. James is very careful. Not mean, you understand. Just careful. We were saving to get married.
Oh, come, my dear.
Here we are.
Come.
Gentlemen, come, let us descend. There is no time to waste. Mrs. McNabb! Mrs. McNabb!
My mother isn't at home, sir.
Oh.
But I have the key.
Oh, gentlemen. Now, Miss McNabb, I hardly know what we shall find upstairs. You will understand if I say that it would be best if you did not come up for the moment. Father Brown?
Yes?
Whilst I would greatly value your help upstairs, I feel you can be of even greater assistance to Miss McNabb as her friend and pastor. If you would be good enough to remain with her while Monsieur Flambeau and I go up.
Yes.
She seems to be in great need of comfort.
Yes, of course.
Come now, Flambeau. There's not a moment to be lost. There, that must be the one. It's the only shut door of any of the rooms that face the garden. Monsieur Flambeau, you are a little more burly than Miss McNabb. Do you think you could break it down?
Oh, I should be able to. Oh, it's stronger than I thought. Oh, here, let me try again. Voilà, ça y est. This way. Oh, no wonder it wouldn't budge. Look at the size of those bolts.
And secured on the inside. That is most remarkable, my dear Flambeau. Now, let us enter. Ah, there, unless I'm greatly mistaken, lies Mr. Todhunter.
Is he dead?
As you hear, he is not. No, he appears to be gagged and tied up. This is most interesting, most interesting. Yes. Doctor, your stethoscope, please.
I am not a doctor. You're thinking of...
Yes, of course. Foolish of me. Now, let me see. Yes. His pulse is a little exalted, but basically normal. There seems to be no sign of injury.
Well, aren't you going to untie him?
No.
But why not?
I have my reasons. However, until I am completely sure, I would rather not reveal them. Yes. Here is everything just as that admirable young woman described it. Playing cards, wine goblets, broken and complete top hat. Ah, yes, and here is the sword, I think. Now, this is very curious. Do you observe?
My God, yes. There's a drop of blood on it.
Oh, that surely, in the circumstances, might reasonably be expected. What is curious is that there should be so little blood, a mere drop. Ah, the top hat is remarkable. Now, where is my lens? What do you make of the hat, Monsieur Flambeau?
It must belong to Mr. Glass. It is exceptionally large, much, much too large for Mr. Todhunter.
I see the faculty of observation is contagious.
Yes.
It is indeed very large. I have only ever known one man with such a large cranium.
You don't mean Professor...
No, impossible. It cannot be he, no. Come over here, would you?
Yes?
Now, would you reach up?
Like this?
Yes, I thought so. You are a large man, Flambeau, yet you cannot reach within 6 inches of this gas bracket. But what do you see on the bracket?
A small fragment of glass. What of it?
You see, but you do not notice. It is a fragment of wine glass. Clearly, the hand holding it must have smashed it against the bracket. Now, Todhunter here is quite short, so it must be his mysterious visitor.
He must be a giant of a man.
Yes, but an elderly giant and something of a dandy. His hat is of a stylish shape and systematically brushed and burnished, though not new.
And from this you deduce that he is an old man?
No, but if you examine it under a lens, it has other peculiarities. The hair of human beings falls out in varying degrees, but always falls out slightly, so I should expect to find a number of hairs on the hatband, but there are very few, and what there are all pure white, which suggests an almost bald, white-haired man, an elderly man, as is confirmed by the querulous voice Miss McNabb heard.
Who is it? Who's there?
Oh, it's only me. Mrs. McNabb has returned, so I left young Maggie with her.
Oh, Father Brown, it is magnificent. Mr. Hood...
Doctor...
Sorry. Dr. Hood has established that Mr. Glass is tall from this fragment of broken wine glass on the gas bracket, that he has an enormous cranium and is a dandy from his hat. And also, from his hat, that he is an old man, because his hatband has few hairs on it, and they are pure white.
Really, that does indeed sound remarkable. But isn't this poor James? Oh, well, alive, I'm glad to see, but why have you not untied him?
I will explain all presently. It was by being too precipitate in the case of the giant rat of Sumatra.
You're sure he's all right?
Oh, you have my word of honour. You need have no worries for Mr. Todhunter.
Yes, but... Oh, well, good. Then do please continue. This is all most interesting.
Thank you. Now, I may say that it is possible that the man Glass was bald or nervous through dissipation rather than age. Mr. Todhunter, it has been remarked, is a quiet, thrifty gentleman, essentially an abstainer. These cards and wine cups are no part of his normal habit. They have been produced for a particular companion, but we may go farther. Mr. Todhunter may or may not possess this wine service, but he seems to possess no wine. What then did these vessels contain?
Well, what do you think?
Well, I would suggest whiskey or brandy.
From a flask in Mr. Glass's pocket.
Exactly. Now we have something like the picture of the man, or at least the type. Tall, elderly, fashionable, but somewhat frayed, certainly fond of play and strong waters, perhaps too fond of them. Mr. Glass is a gentleman not unknown on the fringes of society.
It is quite remarkable, your construction, my dear sir. Quite remarkable. Oh, I must congratulate you on it.
Oh, it is merely a simple use of the scientific imagination, Father Brown. My method is founded on the observance of trifles, the application of logic.
Oh, yes, yes, indeed. But,
Yes?
Shouldn't we tell Miss McNabb that Mr. Todhunter is alive?
Yes, perhaps it would be as well. Would you call her up, Father Brown?
Oh, yes, I will. Miss McNabb?
I fear, Monsieur Flambeau, that what I have to say may well distress Miss McNabb.
How do you mean?
Well, we've seen something of the figure and quality of Mr. Glass. What are the chief facts known of Mr. Todhunter here? They are substantially three. That he is economical, that he is more or less wealthy, and that he has a secret. Now, are these not the chief marks of a man who is likely to be blackmailed?
Yes.
James! James! Thank heavens you're all right. Are you all right? Why is James tied up?
There are sufficient reasons.
Father Brown, why is James still tied up?
Yes, Dr. Hood, why is he still tied up?
Patience, my dear lady, patience. I was just explaining, Father Brown, that Mr. Todhunter is just the kind of man who is likely to be blackmailed.
Blackmailed?
Now, is it not equally obvious to the trained mind that the faded finery, the profligate habits, and the shrill irritation of Mr. Glass are the unmistakable marks of the kind of man who blackmails?
And so these two men met here today and quarrelled using blows and a bare weapon?
Perhaps, though it is a maxim of mine never
Are you going to take these ropes off?
No.
No.
I think those ropes will do very well till your friends the police bring the handcuffs.
What do you mean?
Because you find Mr. Todhunter tied up, you all jump to the conclusion that Mr. Glass had tied him up, and then, I suppose, escaped. Well, there are 4 objections to this.
I should be very interested to hear them.
So should I.
Very well, you shall. First, why should a gentleman as dressy as our friend Glass leave his hat behind if he left of his own free will? Second, how did he leave?
How do you mean?
The window is secured by iron bars. The door, as you discovered, Mr. Flambeau, was bolted from the inside very securely. Thirdly, this blade here has a tiny touch of blood at the point, but there is no wound on Mr. Todhunter. Mr. Glass took that wound away with him.
He took it away with him?
Dead or alive, Miss McNabb. Consider, is it not much more likely that the blackmailed person would try to kill his incubus rather than that the blackmailer would try to kill the goose that lays his golden eggs? Here I think we have a pretty common story. Todhunter was being blackmailed and...
Yes, but the ropes.
Ah, the ropes. I have looked at all the knots on Mr. Todhunter. You will recall, my dear Flambeau, it was the first thing I did upon entering the room.
Yes?
Well, I have made quite a study of knots. I've even written a small monograph on the subject. Come. I suspected something of the sort the moment I realized the door was bolted from the inside. Every one of these knots Mr. Todhunter made himself, and each is so designed that he might loosen it himself. You are a formidable antagonist, Mr. Todhunter, a man of singular ingenuity.
You mean that...
Yes, this whole affair of the ropes is a clever trick, a fake, to make us think him the victim of the struggle instead of the wretched Glass.
Then where is Mr. Glass?
I do not wish to distress you, Miss McNabb, but your mother may not have been far off the mark when she attributed a sinister value to that extremely large trunk in the corner. I suspect that if we were able to obtain the keys to it, we would find...
Say it again, please.
What?
Do you mean that those knots are tied by Mr. Todhunter?
Yes.
And that they're tied in such a way that it is intended that he should be able also to untie them himself?
Precisely. That is what I mean.
Jerusalem. I wondered if it could possibly be it. Excuse me. Mr. Todhunter, may I just... Oh, yes, I see what you mean.
What?
But,
Father Brown?
Yes, you're right, that's it. Can't you see it in the man's face?
What on earth do you mean?
But look at his eyes.
His eyes do look queer. You brutes! I believe it's hurting him. James, are you all right?
No, not that, I think. The eyes have a certain, what shall I say, singular expression, but I would interpret those transverse wrinkles as expressing rather such slight psychological abnormality.
Oh, bosh! Bosh? Can't you see that he's laughing?
Laughing? What on earth is there to laugh at?
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, I think he's laughing at you. And indeed, I'm a little inclined to laugh at myself. And now I know the profession of Mr. Todhunter, or rather, the profession he aspires to.
Is this relevant? I hardly think what Mr. Todhunter does for a living is germane to the issue.
You amaze me, my friend.
Oh, no, but Mr. Todhunter would like to amaze you. Oh, my dear Mr. Todhunter, please, bear with me a moment. What a fool I was to forget we are in a seaside town.
Father Brown, I don't understand.
Oh, Dr. Hood, you are a great poet.
I beg your pardon?
You have called an uncreated being out of the void. How much more godlike that is than if you had only ferreted out the mere facts. Indeed, the mere facts are rather ordinary by comparison.
Father Brown, I have long admired your successes in my field,
but mere trifles compared to your triumphs.
Oh, well, you should not believe all you read. But now, I confess, I have no notion what you are talking about. My facts are all inevitable, though necessarily incomplete. A place may be permitted to intuition, or poetry, if you prefer the term, but only because the corresponding details cannot as yet be ascertained, in the absence of Mr. Glass.
Ah, that's it. That is it. That's the first idea to get fixed. The absence of Mr. Glass. He is so extremely absent. I suppose that there never was anybody as absent as Mr. Glass.
Do you mean he is absent from town?
I mean he is absent from everywhere. He is absent from the nature of things, so to speak.
Do you seriously mean that there is no such person?
It does seem a pity.
Then how do you explain the first proof we found? If there is no Mr. Glass, whose hat is this?
Exactly.
It is yours, is it not, Mr. Todhunter?
But, look, it doesn't fit him. He couldn't possibly wear it.
My friend, I never said he could wear it. I said it was his hat. Or if you insist on a shade of difference, a hat that is his.
How do you mean?
Well, Maggie, if you go to a hatter's shop, you'll see lots of hats that belong to the hatter, but none of them his hat.
But the hatter can get money out of his stock of new hats. What could Mr. Todhunter get out of his exceptionally large old hat?
Rabbits.
Rabbits?
White rabbits. Yes. The hat has few traces of hair, not because Mr. Glass is bald, but because it has never been worn. If you were to examine those white hairs you saw under a microscope, Dr. Hood, you would find they are not human, but rabbit, lost while the white rabbit was being pulled out of the hat. And yes, it's the same with the sword. Mr. Todhunter has no wound on him, but he has a slight wound inside him. Yes, which, to judge from the expression on his face, is not a serious one.
And the cards?
Are for card tricks. They are scattered about because Mr. Todhunter is not yet very good at card tricks, any more than he is, as yet, good at sword swallowing. Hence the slight nick.
What about the ropes? This gentleman says James should be able to escape from them.
Ah, precisely, he should be able to. He is also practicing to be an escapologist. At present he seems better able to tie himself in knots than to escape from those knots.
But what about the two voices I heard?
Have you never heard a ventriloquist?
Father Brown, your reputation is clearly deserved. You are a singularly ingenious person, but there is just one part of Mr. Glass you have not succeeded in explaining away.
Yes?
His name. Miss McNabb distinctly heard Mr. Todhunter say, "Damn it, Mr. Glass."
Well, that's the silliest part of the whole silly story. Since he manifestly is unable to escape from his own bonds, Flambeau, would you cut him free with his own sword?
Certainly.
Yes, then perhaps Mr. Todhunter will explain.
Oh, thank you.
James, are you all right?
Yes, Maggie, I'm all right. Oh,
Oh, I was beginning to think they'd never release me.
I must apologise, Mr. Todhunter.
I should think so too.
Oh, no, not at all, not at all. A perfectly natural mistake.
Aha, but who is this Mr. Glass?
Well, you see, I was practising juggling with glasses. Only I haven't quite got the knack of it yet. To tell you the truth, I nearly did myself a nasty injury when one shattered against the gas bracket.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, and I tend to talk to myself when I'm concentrating. It's a silly habit, I know. So as I toss the glasses up, I'd say 1, 2, 3, and so on. Only I kept missing them. And every time I missed a glass, I'm afraid I used rather strong language. What you heard me saying was 1, 2, 3, etc. Then, Mr. Glass. Missed a glass.
Mr. Glass.
That's right. Oh, and by the way, I had to lock the door. Partly because I didn't want Miss McNabb seeing the tricks till I got them right. And partly because, well, it's a thing about being a magician. You got to keep your secrets secret. Oh, my card.
Oh, thank you. Saradine, the world's greatest conjurer, contortionist, ventriloquist, and human kangaroo. You'll be appearing next month at the Empire Pavilion. You are Saradine, the world's greatest conjurer, etc.
Yeah, well, I know it's coming on a bit strong, sir, but that's the nature of these things, you know. The truth is, gentlemen, I've just been left a bit of money and took the opportunity to get started in the business. All that world's greatest stuff, well, I'm afraid I rather overestimated my powers.
Oh, my
You
dear
are not
James.
the only person to have done that, Mr. Todhunter. I thought I had schooled myself to believe only the empirical evidence of my eyes, for which reason I'm obliged to tell you, Father Brown,
yes?
I cannot believe in a deity.
Oh.
And yet, I confess, I believed the whole romantic fantasy I had spun myself. How could that be?
Well, you will excuse me for saying so, Dr. Hood, but I have often observed that when people cease to believe in God, they do not then, as one might expect, believe in nothing. It is rather the case that they will believe in anything.
In The Absence of Mr. Glass by G.K. Chesterton, the part of Father Brown was played by Andrew Sachs. Flambeau, Olivier Pierre. Orion Hood, Bernard Archard. Maggie, Deborah Makepeace. Todhunter, Kim Wall. Housekeeper, Margaret Ward. The Absence of Mr. Glass was adapted by John Scotney and directed in Bristol by Alec Reed.
100 years ago, a Catholic priest boarded a train.
The little priest had a face as round and dull as a Norfolk dumpling. He had eyes as empty as the North Sea. He had several brown paper parcels which he seemed quite incapable of collecting. He had a large, shabby umbrella which constantly fell on the floor. He did not seem to know which was the right end of his return ticket. He explained with a mooncalf simplicity to everybody in the carriage that he had to be careful because he had something made of real silver with blue stones in one of his brown paper parcels.
G.K. Chesterton's detective, Father Brown, may not be as well known today as, say, Sherlock Holmes or Miss Marple, but he remains one of the most enduring and endearing fictional detectives of all time.
Although he was an entirely innocent and apparently unworldly man, his innocence in fact gives him an insight into the nature of evil. It's the great Chestertonian paradox.
"How in blazes do you know all these horrors?" cried Flambeau. The shadow of a smile crossed the round, simple face of his clerical opponent. "Oh, by being a celibate simpleton, I suppose."
Father Brown is intuitive. He thinks himself into the mind of the criminal. He says himself, "I plan the crimes myself in my head. I work them out in the tiniest detail. And once I know how they were committed and what state of mind the criminal was in order to commit them, well then of course I know who the criminal is.
In 1911, when the first Father Brown collection, called The Innocence of Father Brown, appeared, its author, Gilbert Keith Chesterton, was one of England's biggest literary figures, famous as an essayist, columnist, reviewer, journalist and poet. He published so much that he even founded his own magazine, GK's Weekly, which he edited and mostly wrote. It never ran out of material, but when it ran out of cash, Chesterton would work up a few Father Brown stories.
I think they're marvellous, and I think that they contain a lot of Chesterton's thought.
The novelist and biographer A.N. Wilson.
I think the Father Brown stories are immortal, actually, so they're as relevant today as they were when they were written.
Is Father Brown a typical detective?
No, he is not a typical detective. And indeed, as detective stories, it has to be said, they're not particularly satisfactory. There aren't lots of clues and so forth. And he sort of just knows, doesn't he, very often, by his analysis of human character. And he more than once says in the stories it's the result of sitting in the confessional and hearing all sorts of sin.
He's presented as a bit shambolic, he's a bit shabby, he's a bit, in your own words, he's a bit nondescript. But if you look at Hercule Poirot, he's a ridiculous little man. You look at Miss Marple, she's supposed to be an innocent old lady. Neither of those people is either ridiculous or innocent. Father Brown is hiding his light under his bushel of the shambles, the shabbiness, the rather unworldly perception of things, the alleged forgetfulness, whereas in fact he always remembers what he's got to remember.
Exactly. And of course, in one of the very early stories where he first meets Flambeau, he goes around deliberately making mistakes, upsetting tables in restaurants and things, so that the police will eventually
follow him
and remember where he is. So, I mean, a lot of the mistakes are, as you say, deliberate. And then Chesterton, looking at Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson and various other famous detective stories, realises it's always useful to have a pair, rather like Lewis and Morse on telly, so that Brown and Flambeau quite often work as a team after Flambeau has been converted to the ways of righteousness after his life as a famous French criminal.
Increasingly in today's detective novels, we're let into the secrets of the detective's private life. You know, we see him at home, we see his family problems. Father Brown, we don't even have his Christian name. We haven't a clue about his parish duties. He pops up all over the world and goodness knows how he's paid for it. A bit odd, isn't it?
It is a bit odd, and it's fairly slapdash. I mean, Chesterton, one of the glories of Chesterton as a writer was he was slapdash. He once said, when somebody accused him of being slapdash, if a thing's worth doing at all, it's worth doing badly. And although one doesn't completely see the point of that remark, one sees that some of these stories are very careless. It's not completely true to say that he does do no parish work. We often find Father Brown on his way back from prison visits, for example, on his way back from hearing confessions, on his way to say Mass or his way to benediction or something. That sentence is quite often thrown in. Surprisingly, he seems to change parish quite a lot, but I think Catholic priests do probably. They're probably sent round here, there and everywhere. I mean, sometimes he's in Essex, sometimes he seems to be in London, sometimes in other parts. And I think, actually, to give Chesterton his due, he does usually explain how Father Brown comes to be in these rich men's houses abroad. I mean, usually somebody's called for him.
Father Brown, if you like, has information which the rest of us don't have.
That is the drawback of them if you're looking for the conventional detective story.
So what are we looking for?
On the other hand, what you're looking for partly is the sparkle of Chesterton's prose, which I think is absolutely wonderful, and it literally is bright with colours. He was going to be a painter, but you're also looking for these wonderful conversations that Father Brown has with people, in which he literally gets to the heart of the matter, gets to their heart.
Has it never struck you that a man who does next to nothing but hear men's real sins is not likely to be wholly unaware of human evil? But, as a matter of fact, another part of my trade, too, made me sure you weren't a priest. What? Asked the thief, almost gaping. You attacked reason, said Father Brown. It's bad theology.
Father Brown is always not just trying to solve crimes, he's trying to save souls, and that really is top of his list.
The novelist, Piers Paul Reed.
Criminals they're always shown to have a potential for salvation.
And sometimes he doesn't even end up with having them arrested, does he? He just sort of leaves them to wander off and make their own peace with God.
Yes, and there's some criminal who's now in a monastery, I think. So obviously they do make their peace with God.
Does Father Brown ring true to you as a priest.
Yes, yes. That's the extraordinary thing to me about the Catholic priest is the kind of wisdom that comes with the office and the access of the grace of God, which I think is what Chesterton was trying to get across, does give even the most ordinary priest a kind of wisdom and an understanding, which is lacking in others.
So what drove Chesterton's restless intelligence? I went to his birthplace in London's Kensington to meet his biographer, Ian Kerr.
Well, just in the beginning of his autobiography, he says he was born on Camden Hill. Of course, he was actually born here at number 32 Sheffield Terrace. And he was baptised at St George's Church here. And he said that the waterworks was in the background. But he denies that this church was chosen because they needed a great deal of water to wash away all his original sin.
Here we are now, standing outside the house where he was born. Very posh today, probably cost 7 figures. What was it like then?
Well, it had been professional middle-class kind of people. The family were prosperous. I mean, they owned the Chesterton Estate Agency, which is still going strong.
What sort of childhood did Chesterton have?
Very happy childhood. He apologises in the Apologia. I have no terrible stories to tell about my mother or father or anyway. It was very happy. I think he and his brother were, I have to say, were a bit spoiled, I think, by their parents. And I think that comes out in Chesterton's life. Because although I think he was a genuinely holy man, there was this curious kind of selfishness in him. For example, he used to have to get his wife to tie his tie, and if not, I think very often his shoelaces as well. So he led an idyllic, happy childhood, and indeed his school days were very happy. It wasn't until he got to the Slade that the shadows began to fall.
Now, there are 2 theories about what happened at the Slade. One is that he entered a spiritual crisis, one that he went through some sort of sexual crisis. What happened?
Well, the two, of course, they may have been connected. He obviously was a very late developer sexually. I mean, I've forgotten now when his voice broke, but it was quite late. I think he had glandular trouble, which partly accounts for his huge obesity. The crisis was at the art school when he discovered Impressionism and the whole decadent fin de siècle atmosphere. And there's a particular story that he told in an article in the Daily News called The Diabolist, about this student he met who was totally amoral and had no sense of right or wrong. And this produced a great shock in him.
So Chesterton seems to have been a bit absent-minded, possibly even a bit shambolic.
Well, it wasn't just a bit. He was extremely absent-minded, and there are people who've said, at least one biographer has claimed that at least some of it was put on. I don't believe that. I mean, there's a story, he would stand out in the middle of the road and the traffic would be swirling around him while he would thinking about something. So I think it was genuine. But there was also this, although he'd walked a lot as a schoolboy, I mean, in those days you could walk across London because of no cars, and But afterwards, he seems to sort of stop taking any exercise, which of course partly accounts for his obesity. And he used to take these taxis and then just forget, just literally up the road. He'd be in a wine bar, I suppose, or pub, and he would just simply take the taxi up Fleet Street, with walking distance. And then he'd forget all about the taxi. And by the time he got home, he'd realised he'd actually spent more money than what he was going to earn from the article, from the taxi fares.
When I went to the Slade, I encountered a problem Chesterton had not had to deal with. Students who had occupied the registry in protest against government cuts. I'd arranged to meet the television writer David Renwick there, creator of another unlikely detective, Jonathan Creek.
I kind of came to Chesterton a little bit by a back route, and although by no means all or even a majority of them concern impossible scenarios, I think those were the ones that rang out to me most and what really set me onto this impossible crime tack.
What are the similarities between Jonathan and Father Brown?
I suppose the most obvious similarities are the fact that he is deceptively unassuming, quiet, thoughtful, kind of Miss Marple, so you don't expect them to actually be as capable of working out as they are. I always knew that I wanted that character to be a sort of an anti-hero rather than someone particularly swashbuckling or dynamic. So that was kind of always, that was a given from the beginning. But I suppose the Father Brown character helped to kind of confirm that.
Is Father Brown a credible figure?
I'm not even sure Chesterton would have argued he was that credible. I think he regarded one of the slight flaws in the premise that was the fact that this character is conveniently
on hand at any given location and crime anywhere in the world seems to have no particularly regular or permanent residence or parish. That's the sort of licence you employ as a detective writer.
Murder! Murder!
What the devil's going on?
What's wrong? On the side of the bushes. A corpse.
Show me.
This way.
Mon Dieu. Doctor, his throat's been cut. And recently, the body's still warm.
The most recent Father Brown serialisation, The Secret Garden, is dramatised for Radio 4 by Bert Coules.
The Secret Garden is set largely in France. Father Brown is in France on his way to a conference, and on the way he is invited to dinner with a very famous person, the chief of the French detective force, Aristide Valentin. And while he's at dinner with Aristide Valentin, together with a very varied mix of other dinner guests, something terrible and horrific happens. And Father Brown, despite the presence of the most famous detective in the world, it's Father Brown, the little shy priest, who works out exactly what has happened and how, and tries to bring the culprit to justice.
Who's there? Come out where I can see you. Oh, it's you.
Yes, only me. Dear Lord, how terrible. Anima eos requiescat in pace. Oh.
What?
Well, there are no gates to this garden, are there? You have to come through the house.
What are you blathering on about, man?
And the only entrance is locked and guarded. I was just wondering how in the world this poor soul came to be here. I mean, it's simply not possible, is it?
One of the problems with dramatising Father Brown for the radio is that the character is a very shy, reticent, retiring man. He hovers in the background of scenes, taking everything in. He only very occasionally speaks. When he does speak, he always says something absolutely to the point. A character who is omnipresent but rarely speaks is not the stuff of radio drama.
Around 1930, Chesterton joined Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, and other leading crime writers of the day to form a light-hearted dining and discussion society called the Detection Club. Chesterton served as the club's first president. The holder of that position today is Simon Brett.
Almost all of the major writers of that period were members of the Detection Club. So it was the golden age of the puzzle mystery, the whodunit.
Of course, there was a special initiation ceremony, wasn't there?
Yes, and there still is. The members come in bearing candles, and then the initiates are brought forward and an encomium is spoken to them, and then they have to lay their hand on Eric the Skull.
Eric the Skull?
Eric the Skull, who has been with the society since the beginning.
I think you've got a relic of Chesterton's.
This is really good radio, this bit. I will show you the Chesterton relic. What it actually is the original presidential robe, which I am about to don because I am the current president and am allowed to don it.
Yes.
And it looks, actually, don is not an inappropriate word because it does look quite like an academic gown, if I can get into it.
You can get into that with rather a lot of room to spare.
Yes, it is. It's very large.
You must have been a very big man.
Well, this is one of the views, and another of the people who became president was Dorothy L. Sayers, who was also of substantial dimensions. So I think it was made for the larger person. I'm rather dwarfed
I don't
by
wish
myself.
to be rude, but I mean, you're not tiny of circumference, and yet
No.
you could get three of you in there.
Plenty of me. Three of me, yes. I look forward to that occasion, but it hasn't happened yet.
Do you think he really filled the cloak out?
I think he did. And it's also very well designed because, you can kind of flap it around and wrap it around. And I'm sure it's very good for gestures during the initiation ceremony. I think they had a sense of theatre, and this gown represents that sense of theatre.
Why do you think Chesterton was so keen on this club?
I think Chesterton had a sense of fun.
And I think all of the writers of that period, the Golden Age crime writers, had a sense of fun. It was a parlour game.
But there was also a real Father Brown. And the real Father Brown was a Catholic priest, John O'Connor, who played a central role in Chesterton's conversion. William Oddie is the former editor of the Catholic Herald and chairman of the Chesterton Society.
He was staying in Yorkshire, in Ilkley, and he met a man called Father John O'Connor, who he discussed all kinds of things with. One of the things he said was he was going to write some articles taking a certain point of view. And Father O'Connor said, look, I think I need to tell you a bit about what you're attacking here. And he suddenly realised, Chesterton, that this man, this quiet, innocent priest, knew far more about the real nature of evil. He says, I had imagined for myself any amount of iniquity, and it was a curious experience to find that this quiet and pleasant celibate had plumbed the abysses of darkness far deeper than I had. And when they get back to the house, there's a couple of young Cambridge undergraduates who were very impressed by Father O'Connor. He says, a remarkable man, knows a great deal about Palestrina and Baroque architecture and so on. All the same, it's all very well to like religious music and so on, but really he doesn't know anything about the real evil in the world. He's shut up in a cloister. And Chesterton says, to me, still almost shivering with the appallingly practical facts of which the priest had warned me, this comment came with such a colossal irony that I nearly burst into laughter.
Journalist Julia Smith's book, The Elusive Father Brown, tracked down the story of Monsignor John O'Connor.
Well, this is St Cuthbert's Church, and Father O'Connor was here from 1922 until he died. And this is Julie and Gerald Sullivan, and they lived in the parish and all have strong memories of Father O'Connor.
Every afternoon we would come, and all these front benches were full of children. He would stand here in the middle and talk to us. The things that we remember best are ghost stories. There was one story. It was in church one evening. It was dark and the church was closed, and the priest came out robed to say mass at the side altar, and he couldn't say him. He had some sort of problem. Father O'Connor asked him, can I help you? And the priest said he had not said some of the masses he should have said when he was alive, and he was trying to say them now in church. So Father O'Connor said the masses, and the guy never appeared again.
He was small, rounded, always walked with his hands behind his back. You'd see him walking round the streets of the parish, dangling his rosary beads behind his back.
There's a story that he once went to the local bread shop, and he bought a meat pie, and he asked the lady, would you wrap it up and make it look like a Bible?
This parish is a real mixture. Upper Heaton are the posh rich people. They play bridge. Lower Heaton are the middle and poorer people. They play whist. And he used to mix with these posh Heaton people, and he used to mix just as much with the poorer people behind the mill. I think he was such a contradictory kind of person. He was so intelligent, but so down to earth. Such an intellectual, but could swear and simple and got on with absolutely everybody.
I didn't know anything about Father Brown and Chesterton.
All I knew, there was a photograph in St Joseph's College of Father O'Connor and Chesterton together, but it didn't mean anything to me. I didn't know about Father Brown in those days.
Father Brown, a talk by Father Brown on the famous series of stories by G.K. Chesterton, how they came to be written, and the chief character's actual reactions when he read them. Here is Father Brown himself.
After Chesterton died, it became known, of course, Father O'Connor was the original of Father Brown, or Chesterton himself had written about it in his autobiography. And he wrote the script, and he was very pleased because they didn't really alter it.
At first, I did not care for the stories. I thought the mind of Chesterton was simple in its workings, and the stories were too simple to constitute real problems. But on reading the stories a second time, 10 years later, I became amazed at their ingenuity, and many a reader has since assured me that they do rank high as mere detective stories. In fact, much above the average. To this day, I am surprised at how much he made of how little I told him.
But the mystery of Father Brown doesn't end there. Alec Guinness starred as the detective in a 1954 film. Years later, he credited an experience he had, while in costume as Father Brown, with starting him on the road to conversion as a Roman Catholic.
Father Brown. Oh, Signor. Sorry. So sorry to have disturbed you.
You will be even sorrier by the time the bishop has heard of this.
You identify this person as Father Brown?
I regret to say, yes.
Piers Paul Reed is Alec Guinness's biographer.
There's a wonderful story in his autobiography of how he was walking back from the set, I think in Burgundy in France, and a little boy emerges from the hedge and walks alongside and takes his hand and babbles away to him, and then at a certain point just sort of disappears. And Alec says in his autobiography that this really was one of the things that made him become a Catholic, that a priest, a figure in the Catholic Church could sort of inspire such trust in a little boy, moved him greatly. Of course, nowadays,
Yes,
because of what we know about clerical abuse, that there's a certain suspicion would be aroused. But the fact is, it was a sort of vision of innocence which attracted him to the church. It has to be said, there were much more complicated and really theological reasons why he became a Catholic.
G.K. Chesterton himself converted to Catholicism in 1922, more than a decade after he'd started writing about Father Brown. Could Father Brown have converted Chesterton as much as Monsignor O'Connor did? But the story of G.K. Chesterton, his journey to the Catholic faith, and his little detective priest doesn't end there. A century after Chesterton wrote the story of a humble parish priest boarding a train, some admirers of the writer want to put him on a further journey, to sainthood. There is a campaign to have Chesterton canonised. William Oddie is a former editor of the Catholic Herald and chairman of the Chesterton Society.
I think he was holy. I mean, he's not holy as the church understands it. He enjoyed the pleasures of the table too much. He was too funny. He wasn't the Catholic Church's idea of a holy man. But all those who knew him spoke of his enormous goodness. And we were all told to love our enemies, but with one or two notable exceptions, he truly did.
But to become a saint, which is what canonisation is about, you need a miracle. Has there been a miracle?
Oh, no, I don't think there has, no.
Is anybody praying to Chesterton?
Oh, yes. We had a conference on the holiness of G.K. Chesterton in Oxford. From this conference emerged a prayer which is now widely being prayed. And I know that there are people, for instance, there's a girl in Italy near death who's being prayed for through Chesterton. I don't know of any actual miracles. It takes years and years and years. So I'm not expecting anything soon. All we can do at this stage is get the thing underway and see how it goes.
I have actually got it here.
Right.
And I think it might be quite interesting to hear this.
Yeah.
God our Father, you filled the life of your servant Gilbert Keith Chesterton with a sense of wonder and joy, and gave him a faith which was the foundation of his ceaseless work, a hope which sprang from his enduring gratitude for the gift of human life, and a charity towards all men, particularly his opponents. May his innocence and his laughter, his constancy in fighting for the Christian faith in a world losing belief, his lifelong devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and his love for all men, especially the poor, bring cheerfulness to those in despair, conviction and warmth to lukewarm believers, and the knowledge of God to those without faith. And we beg you to grant the favours we ask through his intercession, so that his holiness may be recognised by all, and the Church may proclaim him blessed.
Yeah.
For myself, the idea of Saint Gilbert Chesterton is something of a stretch. But it's certainly true that the Father Brown stories do tell us something profound about faith, as well as something entertaining about crime.
I try to get inside the murderer, thinking his thoughts, wrestling with his passions, till I have bent myself into the posture of his hunched and peering hatred, till I see the world with his bloodshot and squinting eyes, till I am, really, a murderer. Ah, said Mr. Chase, regarding him with a long, grim face, and added, and that is what you call a religious